Hello, welcome everybody. Wow, this is fabulous for our first lecture of the summer season. Thanks for coming. I want to thank our two lovely sponsors, one of whom is here tonight. Abe's Appraisal. Want to wave your hand there? Abe's Appraisal. And also Hammond Lumber Company. We're so grateful to have sponsors. And we could always use more sponsors for all of our wonderful programming, our other programs too. So businesses and individuals can do that. So if you're interested, you can come see us. Now, Chuck Rand. Even though Chuck grew up in Damariscotta, he's been hanging out in this peninsula for a long time. Starting with about 10 years of digs at Colonial Pemaquid under the leadership of Helen Camp in his young youth. And just ever since, you've kind of been around ever since, which has been wonderful. But his resume, if you're here tonight, you've probably read his resume, but I just have to highlight them because he's done so many interesting things. All the museum work that he's done, the archival work that he's done, the historical work that he's done, everything from the Smithsonian Institution, and I had to look this up, the numismatic collection, which is, I had to look that up. It relates to coins, paper, and currency and metals. So, I mean, he just has such a breadth of experience, it's kind of crazy. He was the curator of, and cataloger of political commercial archives at University of Oklahoma. And, the Cowboy Museum, come on, it's crazy, the breadth of things that he has done. The Maine Historical Society, Sabbath Day Lake Shaker Community. But, of course, we're very proud to have our association at OBHS with Chuck for many, many years. He was on the board for a very long time. He was co-president with Belinda for many years. 9 years he worked as a volunteer doing our archives, and now he's on our staff, so we're very happy and proud about that. So Chuck has cataloged so many thousands of things that are available to all of us digitally, and always looking for more. So we're very happy and grateful about that. And that's how you find interesting things like Martin Van Buren Fountain's journal, diary, which is what he's going to talk about. So thank you, Chuck.
Am I on? So, thanks for all of you coming. Man, I didn't expect this crowd because I thought this was a local boy making good again. But before I begin my presentation, I got to turn on my mouse. Before I begin my presentation, I want to use a bit of time to talk about OBHS's Bristol History Center. As you can see, it's located at the Poole Brothers store, lately known as Hammond Lumber. It includes an environment-controlled archival vault, a reading room, and an exhibit gallery, which currently houses an exhibit about the history behind the construction of and dedication of the Fort William Henry Memorial at Colonial Pemaquid, and curated by a complete unknown, Belinda Ogier. So that is what you would see if you paid an in-person visit to the BHC, but OBHS has an online web presence, as well as where one can search the database for objects, library items, archival materials, and photos, and also a considerable catalog of genealogical information. Go to the OBHS website, click on Collections, and then decide what catalog you want to search in. Many people choose keyword searching. Just have fun and explore. Now, that was my plug for the OBHS's Bristol History Center and its collections. An unpaid advertisement. What?
There's the mill, too.
Of course, the mill at Pemaquid Falls. This summer's presentations are centered around local persons leaving the town of Bristol to pursue careers elsewhere. Martin Van Buren Fountain was one of those local persons. I would like to say that he was a local boy that made good, but not so much. As you will learn, instead of pursuing farming, he pursued seafaring of one kind or another. This occupation, as it turned out, caused him not only physical pain and mental anguish, but also gave him a brush with history, and in particular, the American Colonization Society. Also, I want to emphasize that the logbook that Martin kept, and upon which this talk is based, is a record that the OBHS preserves and makes available to researchers in the Bristol History Center. Acquired by the Old Bristol Historical Society in 2023, this is the journal whose content we shall explore this evening. A section of it is an almost daily account of his trade voyage to the west coast of Africa. It is Matthew Fountain, third great nephew of Martin Van Buren Fountain, who donated this unique and historically significant journal to the OBHS. Matt has not only donated some wonderful images created and preserved by the Fountain family over the years, but Matt has volunteered innumerable hours of physical labor to the OBHS through interior painting, heavy lifting at the mill at Pemaquid Falls, and landscaping. Let's give Matt a round of applause. Okay, I want to begin by placing Van in his local Bristol boy status. Here's a current Google aerial view of the Fountain Farm location at 282 Lower Round Pond Road, the red dots. By the way, I'll continue to refer to Martin Van Buren Fountain as Van, as I believe that name is what he was called. It also appears on his gravestone. That was a downer. To provide a little bit of context, this is the earliest view I could find of beautiful downtown Bristol Mills, around 1890. Prominently featured on this card photograph, yes, donated by Matt, is the Calvin Chandler Robbins Mill. One can also see the town office to the left. On a circa 1920 snapshot, yes, donated by Matt, we can see from Sproul's Hill the Fountain Farmstead where Van began his life. It's over to the, well, it's pretty obvious there, I guess. Here's a blurry detail from that snapshot showing the Fountain Farm. Here's another snapshot image, courtesy of Matt again, showing the Fountain Farmstead in the snow located at 282 Lower Round Pond Road. Here's a snapshot, you know from whom, of the Lower Round Pond Road running between the Fountain House and barn. Van was one of 12 children. His siblings were, and I guess I won't list them, but you can find the listing. With dark hair, bluish hazel eyes, and a florid or flushed complexion, Van had somewhat of a diminutive stature, standing at 5 feet 3.5 inches. The images here is to give you a sense of the farming undertaken by the Fountains, hanging on the Fountain Farm probably about 1905, showing left to right, Maurice Fountain, Mildred Fountain Keyser, Fred Fountain, an unidentified person on the wagon, and Edgar Fountain with the rake. Edgar is Matt's second great-grandfather. Oh yes, and Matt donated these images as well. The cyanotype, which is the blue image there, is of Edgar Fountain, probably around 1900. Edgar was Van's brother and was perhaps 65 years old at the time. Van also had a condition of slight strabismus, cross-eyed. That probably made him appear to be looking in different directions. I illustrate this condition with the current FBI director, Kash Patel. I mean, that's only my opinion. It's not. Van also had a tattoo, MVB, on his inside left forearm. According to the 1850 and 1860 censuses, while living at home, Van was a sailor involved in water transportation as early as the age of 16 years. So by the time he had that opportunity to travel to Africa, he had plenty of experience. His brothers Jacob, Edgar, Isaac, and Melvin, and Joseph also had seafaring careers early in their lives. The youngest was master mariner. Joseph was the youngest and became a master mariner in 1900. By the way, these brothers ended up farming. They quit the seafaring job. For a reference, a photo of President Martin Van Buren by renowned Civil War photographer Matthew Brady. Born on September 11, 1833, in Bristol, Van was the son of Captain Isaac Fountain and Elizabeth Wilson Montgomery. Why he was named Martin Van Buren is unknown. During the year of Martin's birth, the only consequential and possibly relevant thing of note was that Martin Van Buren was Andrew Jackson's vice president. While Van Buren was nicknamed the Little Magician due to his political adeptness, it is doubtful that Martin's father, Isaac, knew this, and therefore he would be impressed enough to ascribe his forename to Van. Isaac's affinity for the name remains a mystery. Seemingly, son Martin went by the name Van, so that's how, as I said before, we'll keep referring to him. The reason I'm showing you these images of Van's brothers is to give you a sense of what Van might have looked like if he had lived to their ages. Edgar on the top and to the left, and Melvin Newell to the right. Both images about 1905. So this is what Van wrote in his journal in August 1864, after completing a trading voyage to West Africa. Doing nothing with nothing to do, lazy as the devil and getting lazier. The round-trip voyage from New York to West Africa began on December 15th, 1863, and ended on July 14th, 1864. It would be a journey that had political implications related to the settlement of Liberia, a journey hindered by tornadoes, squalls, becalmed seas, heat and humidity, and a journey that tested the physical and mental limits of Van. So let's get into it. This is a harbor scene of Round Pond around 1890. The person, one of the people in that rowboat there in the front is Henry Chamberlain, for anybody that, it's also a photograph by Leon Munro. This is a detail from a card photograph showing the Moxie Cove Pogie factory. Two steamers and Chamberlain are unloading fish and loading oil at the last operational factory on the peninsula. So why would Van choose a life at sea? By 1815, on the Pemaquid Peninsula, there were four main sources of income. This is according to Josh Hanna. Farming, fishing, lumbering, and shipbuilding. Farming was the primary source of income and sustenance for the Fountain family. By 1850, less than 40% of Pemaquid men identified as farmers. Locals were drawn to the more profitable enterprises of the prosperous maritime economy. By 1860, there were 11,375 mariners in the state of Maine, a number that constituted almost 1/5 of the population. While economic gain played a large part in turning to the sea, there was also the attraction of adventure. Historian Sally Merrill writes, "Many young boys and young men in the 19th century yearned to make their livelihood on the seafaring vessels. They were thrilled by a sense of adventure and exploration. They were lured by the ever-changing face of the ocean, mysterious, tumultuous, and mercurial. Captains were attracted by the challenge of charting a course through tumultuous and tranquil waters." So it's not surprising that Van turned to the sea by age 16. He was 30 years old when he set off to the coast of Africa, on a trade mission, and captured his experience on this voyage in writing. So this is the first page of the journal and a close-up of the first paragraph. In his first journal entry, Van wrote, "New York, December 15th, 1863, I joined the bark Thomas Pope of New York, Captain Alexander, bound on a trading voyage to the west coast of Africa. On January 15th, 1864, he wrote, passengers came on board, 20 in number, 19 black ones, men, women, and children, emigrating to Liberia, and one white man, the consul to Monrovia. The following day, he wrote, in the morning, the sailors came on board, hauled out of the dock, and proceeded on our voyage with a fair wind, weather clear and cold. Generally, a bark is a sailing." Now, this, Bobby Eyes would know this better than me, so I'm just reading this, and I have no idea what I'm reading. But generally, a bark is a sailing ship with 3 or more masts, where the fore and main masts are square rigged, and the and the aftmost mast is fore and aft rigged. Barks were popular in the mid-19th century because they were easier to handle and more economical to operate with a smaller crew. So here's what New York City looked like in 1863 in the upper left, and here's what a typical bark looked like. This is the Salmon B. Chase, probably around 1878 or so. I couldn't find any Thomas Pope, so now, okay. Here's where Van's journal becomes more than a seaman's log, but a historical record. While he never mentions the consul to Monrovia's name, he was Abraham Hansen, an English-born American pastor and diplomat, but more importantly, he had been appointed by President Abraham Lincoln on June 8, 1863, as the first U.S. Commissioner and Consul General to Monrovia, Liberia. On confirmed by the Senate on January 12, 1864, Hansen would present his credentials in Monrovia on February 23, 1864. Correspondingly, Van's Sunday, February 21st entry relates that at 9 p.m., the Thomas Pope came to anchor at Monrovia, and that in the morning of February 22nd, that the passengers, including Hansen, went ashore. So I think you can see where Monrovia is. Consul Abraham Hansen's background bears some further scrutiny, and that's him in the upper left. He came to America from England as early as July 1827. He was educated near Bromley in South Yorkshire. He moved to the United States to become a pastor in the Methodist Episcopal Church, serving in parishes in Aurora, Illinois, Chicago, Milwaukee, and Racine, Wisconsin. He left the ministry in 1851 due to poor health and relocated to Kenosha, Wisconsin, where he became involved in local politics and was elected city treasurer for several terms. According to the census of 1850 and 1860, he was a Methodist Episcopal clergyman in Wisconsin. In May 1862, he became U.S. commercial agent in Liberia with strong ties to the American Colonization Society. Just prior to his voyage, Hansen arrived on the ship Mary Caroline Stevens, which is on the right, from Liberia to Baltimore on December 14, 1863. It is Hansen's public support of the ACS, that makes Van's January 15th entry about 19 black ones, men, women, and children immigrating to Liberia significant and historical. The ACS was created in December 1816 by Presbyterian minister Robert Finley, along with a group of influential men, including Henry Clay, James Monroe, Andrew Jackson, Daniel Webster, and Francis Scott Key. Its mission was to assist in the colonization and removal of free black people from the United States. In 1821, ACS agents purchased land along the west coast of Africa for settlement and created the colony of Montserrado, later becoming Liberia. In 1847, the Liberian legislature declared independence and elected Joseph Jenkins Roberts, its first president, and that's Joseph Jenkins Roberts there. This is to show you just some, these are refugees awaiting transportation to Liberia at Mount Olivet Baptist Chapel in New York City. This is in 1880. And that's another map of Liberia. While he also endorsed colonization earlier in his life, Abraham Lincoln, as president on August 14, 1862, according to historian Morgan Robinson, invited a group of prominent black leaders to the White House to discuss colonization. He argued that black and white people were not capable of living together in the United States, and that it was unfair to both groups to have to suffer in the other's presence. Lincoln would issue the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863, wherein all persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state, the people whereof shall then be in rebellion against the United States, shall be thenceforth and forever free. The executive government of the United States, including the military and naval authority thereof, will recognize and maintain the freedom of such persons, and will do no act or acts to repress such persons or any of them in any efforts they may make for their actual freedom. But what of Hanson's involvement? I know you're wondering what's happened to Martin, but I'll get back to him in a very succinct way. But what of Hanson's involvement with the ACS, and how did Hanson see his role as counsel? On January 16, 1866, Hanson addressed at length, it was at length, the society at its 49th annual meeting, and his feelings and sentiments were revealed. Now, bear with me, I'm going to read part of it, and this is the key part here, so you can read that so you get a sense of what I'm about to read. While I believe that the colored people who have too long performed useful labor in the cultivation of our cotton and our sugar, etc., have become seemingly indispensable to the interests of a certain portion of our country and have established a just claim to all the rights of manhood, yet I have come to the discouraging conclusion that ages must pass away and many a brilliant intellect be shrouded in obscurity before the iron hand of prejudice and prescription has been raised and removed from that patient, toiling, suffering race. In the present crisis in the affairs of the country, the Civil War, the continuance amongst us of this emancipated throng is much to be desired. I can use no arguments to induce them to leave us, but such as based upon their own and their posterity's immediate and future weal. Were I a member of that race, with my knowledge of the tremendous weight that still oppresses them, and of the illimitable field which invites them to Liberia, with its innumerable facilities for comfort, independence, and usefulness, I should gather my family around me and embark on board the first vessel bound for that distant shore, even if I had to avail myself of the generous aid which this society offers. And then he concludes with that there, and I'm sure you've had a chance to read it, so I won't read it. In other words, the key thing is, I say then to the members and friends of the American Colonization Society, keep your armor on and keep that armor bright. Your gigantic work is only just begun. I invite you in the name of Liberia to send them willing, industrious, skillful immigrants by the shipload, if you will. I do not say send them a horde of helpless creatures. These you must keep until we have atoned for our enormous sins of oppression by educating and elevating them to the proper standard fit for civilized society. And then, if they will, let them come. Okay, so believing that black and white people would never be able to live together harmoniously, Hansen implored the ACS to keep up its work of colonizing Liberia by recruiting basically the best and brightest, not a horde of helpless creatures. About 7 months later, on June 20th, 1866, Hansen became ill with a fever and died, thus ending his mission. He was buried in Monrovia. In summarizing the effectiveness of the ACS, historian Morgan Robinson wrote, "In spite of strong support for the ACS and its mission, the organization and its efforts failed because of opposition from the free black community and its leaders. Much of the free black community, particularly those in northern states, felt that they were American citizens by birth and had no interest in leaving their homeland to live in a place they did not know or feel connected to in any meaningful way. After Liberia gained its independence in 1847, the organization further stagnated and the American Colonization Society formally dissolved in 1964. This is a view of the colonial settlement at Cape Monserrato, or June 1825. The American Colonization Society had powerful white supporters, as I've said before, and all of whom enslaved people. Its efforts were supported by President Monroe, and by 1867, 13,000 free black people had immigrated to Liberia. Most African Americans and abolitionists were never enamored of the ACS colonization mission. In 1849, Frederick Douglass wrote, "Shame upon the guilty wretches that dare propose and all that countenance such a proposition. We live here, have lived here, have a right to live here, and mean to live here." So why would free, educated black people who were born in the United States, whose roots in many cases went back generations, want to move to an unknown country? For many, their roots do certainly harken back to Africa, but against their will as slaves. They, in fact, although not officially until the passage of the 14th Amendment in 1868, had birthright citizenship. Isn't that curious? The 14th Amendment reads in part, "All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside." Seems pretty clear. Currently, and somewhat ironically, the 14th Amendment is under assault by the current administration, where birthright citizenship is being questioned, even though it's a constitutional right. Why should the children born in the United States of undocumented immigrants, a civil crime, be denied citizenship? Now, this is my opinion, and I won't get into it at all here, but there needs to be a comprehensive immigration reform plan to deal with non-citizens and whose children were born here. But to deport their children to a place where they've never been seems inappropriate, to say the least. The difference between then and now is the black people had the freedom to choose their destiny, whether or not to leave the U.S. for Liberia, while current dreamers who were born here may not have that opportunity to choose. What will happen following the Supreme Court's ruling to curb court injunctions that block Trump's birthright citizenship plan? What was it that Betty Davis's character warned in All About Eve? Fasten your seatbelt, it's going to be a bumpy ride. It'll definitely be a bumpy ride. So with all that background, let me get back to the round-trip voyage that Van lived and wrote about, and what his writings reveal about his character. To recap, Van set sail on the bark Thomas Pope from New York Harbor under a Captain Alexander on January 16th, and arrived at Cape Verde off the coast of Africa on February 11th, then Gorée Island the following day, and by the 17th, anchored off Cape Sierra Leone's lighthouse. Van makes intermittent comments about the black passengers. All were quite derogatory. In any case, he was not impressed by them, and in fact expressed some disparaging racist remarks about them intermittently throughout his journal. One must remember that Van was a product of his time. He referred to them as mooks, a slang and disparaging term for black people with its English origins referring to donkeys, but became a slang expression for a contemptible, incompetent person. As a tamer example of his antipathy toward the passengers, he wrote, 30. As a tamer example of his antipathy toward the passengers, he wrote in his March 1st entry, "All the cabin passengers went ashore at this place, Bassa, Cameroon, except to 2 colored ladies, which are bound to Sino, a county in Liberia, and they put on more airs than a French dancing master." Why this phrase was used in a derogatory way might have something to do with wealth and class. While discussing the English dancing master of the late 17th century, Colin Hume writes, "At the time, anyone who aspired to any sort of position in society was expected to be able to dance. Wealthy landowners would bring the dancing master into their houses to teach them and their families. The not so wealthy would go to dancing classes which the dancing master ran regularly, perhaps in a rented hall or a schoolroom. Dancing masters belonged to an established job category. In almost all cases, they were lower born than their pupils, tasked with showing their young charges the appropriate demeanor and carriage of a class to which they themselves did not belong." So from Van's point of view, the ladies were putting on airs beyond their station in life, I suspect. Why did Van have these racist tendencies? One must remember that during the time of this voyage, the country was in the midst of the Civil War, a war fought ostensibly over slavery. Slaves were a key labor force in the trade economics of sea captains and seamen like Van. For example, historian Sally Merrill writes, "The West Indies trade was lucrative. Ships would depart with lime and lumber from Maine and return with sugar, molasses, guavas, mangoes for Boston and Portland. Most of the time, these commodities were harvested and loaded by slave labor. In this way, these black slaves became an indispensable part of the trade." Also, consider that Van had the perspective of viewing slaves, as Hansen said, as a horde of helpless creatures. From that perspective, Van had a conflicted view of the black immigrants who were free and educated on board the Thomas Pope. They were not possibly what he expected. They were not in their place. Of course, this is all conjecture on my part. But what of the voyage itself? What does Van write that reveals his character and disposition beyond his racist tendencies and about the degree of success of the trade mission? The ship, loaded with tobacco, made its way southeasterly along the West African coast. While in Monrovia, Van writes on February 28th that $5,000 worth of their cargo was sold, but after that there was not that much success. By April 18th, while anchored in Gabon, he writes, "We found we could not sell our cargo here, so we concluded we would take some wood for ballast and leave for the Gold Coast, as there is no trade in this part of Africa for us." 6 days later, Van begins commenting on his health. "I am about played out. I cannot straighten up. I can barely drag one foot after the other. No one knows what I suffer, and I suppose no one cares." The next day, 48 miles north of the equator, he writes, "And I am miserable." On May 1st, the Thomas Pope anchored at Elmina, a Dutch settlement on the Gold Coast. Van writes, "I am a used-up man." Below left is the Elmina, Ghana in the 1660s. It's a tourist attraction now, but it was also in a movie we just recently saw. They used it as a penitentiary or something. Anyway. As he did several times during the voyage, Van would transcribe poetry verses befitting or reflecting his mood or situation at the time. On May 1st, he transcribed 3 stanzas from a 7-stanza poem that he had probably committed to memory and that had given him solace. The poem, written by Sarah Tittle Bolton in 1850, is called Paddle Your Own Canoe. Here are those stanzas with Van's alternate words to the right. Voyager upon troubled sea, to yourself be true, and where'er your lot may be, paddle your own canoe. Never, though the winds may rave, falter, nor look back, but upon the darkest wave leave a shining track. Every wave that bears you on to the silent shore, from its sunny source has gone to return no more. Then let not an hour's delay cheat you of your due, but while it is called today, paddle your own canoe. If your birth denied you wealth, lofty state and power, honest fame and hearty health are a better dower. But as these will not suffice, wisdom true pursue, and to gain the unfading prize, paddle your own canoe. There are other poetic verses that he included in his journal which really did reflect his sensitive and depressive nature. For example, on February 2nd, one verse reads, "Breathe not the troubles to the stars that shine so far above. They will not stoop to pity thee, nor whisper words of love, nor think thou this pale, cold moon will hear thy notes of woe, for the grand music of the spheres would drown thy wail below. Complain not to the roaring winds, they will not hear nor stay to breathe one word of sympathy or kiss thy tears away." A further example, on the Sunday evening, March 13th, all 3 stanzas recounting summer boyhood memories and demonstrating a bit of homesickness. I am sitting all alone tonight and thinking of the past, of sweet and sunny boyhood hours that were too bright to last. I'm thinking of a friend I had in those long summer days, whose smiles to me were welcome as the sun's soft golden rays. How oft we strolled together in the fields and by the lake. Oh, happy days, oh, happy hours. What feelings ye awake. On May 2nd, Captain Alexander wanted Van to send ashore in Elmina a hogshead of tobacco for trade. A hogshead is a very large wooden barrel that usually measured 48 inches long and 30 inches in diameter at the top. A fully packed hogshead of tobacco weighed about 1,000 pounds. Van writes, "In breaking it out, the hooks slipped off, striking me in the jaw, breaking the same, and knocking all my jaw teeth out on one side." To say the least, Van was in a poor way, as we already know that. To add insult to injury, 6 days later, May 7th, while homeward bound, he wrote, "Had a tornado and plenty of rain, enough to wet everything belonging to me, bed and all bad manners to the coast of Africa." By the way, a ton is equivalent to 4 hogshead, in case you were wondering. On July 14th, 1864, the round trip Africa and voyage of 5 months, 28 days had ended. And the journal entry for that day was the last entry until August 1864, the entry that began this current account of the voyage and its tangential importance. Doing nothing with nothing to do, lazy as the devil, getting lazier. But Van's life was about to change. From his journal on September 22nd, 1864, Van went to Portland and on the 23rd shipped with the rank of seaman in the Union Navy for 2 years or sooner discharged. He was sent to Boston and assigned to the USS Brooklyn, bound for the South. You can see what Van might have looked like in his seaman uniform. That's the top left. These are images of the USS Brooklyn. As flagship, the Brooklyn was part of the task force to bombard Fort Fisher at the entrance of Cape Fear Cape Fear River, North Carolina. The first battle of Fort Fisher was the most concentrated naval bombardment of the war. The fleet fired 20,271 projectiles into the fort during the first battle. Another 19,682 were fired during the second battle. In total, the U.S. Navy expended 39,953 projectiles at the fort. Van was there from December 24th, 25th, 26th, and January 13th, 14th, and 15th, 1865. The fort surrendered on the 15th. It is no wonder that Van characterized this engagement, quote, "the most terrible bombardment ever known in American waters." The remaining entries in Van's journal were sporadic between September 2nd, 1865 and October 29th, 1868. Therein he describes the weather, his water transportation and fishing mackerel activities in and around Bristol. At this time, he was probably living with his widowed mother, Elizabeth. One opportunity to voyage again to the west coast of Africa was lost when he became sick and hospitalized in New York. So, in recounting this, on October 15th, 1866, he left Bristol for New York. On November 14th, he shipped and went on board the brig Samson, bound to the west coast of Africa, end quote. But on December 7th, he was stricken with chronic pleurisy and carried to the New York hospital where he remained until the 10th of February, 1867. Chronic pleurisy is a condition where the membranes covering the lungs and chest wall became infected. This is a view of the village, Round Pond Village Harbor and Fishing Fleet, and it's from a stereograph from Craig Elliott. Van had suffered greatly and silently on his Africa voyage. He gained some solace by transcribing comforting lines from poems. On August 29th, 1869, nearly 36 years old, he died from a lumbar abscess, which in modern parlance is a spinal epidural abscess. According to Dr. Jeffrey Harris, they are usually the result of bacterial or fungal infections that can begin elsewhere in the body and travel into the spinal cord or column, or they develop directly in the area. These infections cause a pocket of pus to form between the bones of the spine and the lining membrane of the spinal cord. They can be caused by the introduction of bacteria or fungus from, among other means, an open wound or an already occurring spinal issue, like a compression fracture. The symptoms include terrible back pain, tenderness in the back, fevers, bladder or bowel issues, and an inability to walk or move around. An untreated spinal cord abscess can lead to spinal cord compression and cause permanent severe paralysis and nerve loss, and in Van's case, led to his death. Van is buried near family members in Harrington Cemetery, but his recording of the voyage that brought the first U.S. Commissioner and Consul General to Monrovia, Liberia, for the first time is not buried. His journal is part of the collections of the Old Bristol Historical Society's Bristol History Center archives, where it is preserved for posterity. This is a view of Round Pond in 1890, photographed by G. Herbert Roberts and loaned from Carla Chadwick. I thought there was a kind of a peaceful way to end this journey. So that's all I have. I can take questions, but I'm not Bobby Eyes can do the ship stuff, and anybody that knows more about the American Colonization Society is welcome to talk about that too, because I was just trying to provide this whole thing in context, so I didn't go into great detail about stuff. But if you have any questions, I'd be glad to take them. Yeah?
So there's a microphone here. There's a bit of a cord, so I'll try to bring it to you if you have questions for Chuck.
How old was he when he died?
Just about 36. Yeah, and he was suffering the whole time, it seems, and I tried to find those other verses. I looked all over the place for those other verses, and I don't know whether he made these up or I could not find them anywhere. So I know that Paddle Your Own Canoe was a major poem of that time, and I have a feeling that he memorized all these things. I can't believe that he would bring a book of poetry with him, such terrible conditions on board the ship. Anyway.
Well, I do. You had that photo of the cemetery he was buried in,
Yeah.
and he's a Mason. Do you know what lodge he was affiliated with?
No, I don't, but I could possibly look it up. I found out a lot about him. I mean, his draft profile gave me all the, that he had blue eyes and Florida complexion, and he was short and had that eye situation. Yeah,
Did you see someone in
I thought I did, but okay.
Chuck, what did the Thomas Pope bring back from Monrovia?
Well, the only thing that I could see was they tried to unload all this tobacco that they had. It wasn't that great, it wasn't successful that way, but they stopped in again. I didn't get into this part of it. They stopped in again at Monrovia and picked up more passengers to go back. So, and then they ended up back in New York City, and there's no indication that I couldn't find a register, to find out who was on board. And there was a register for the Pope in 1868. It listed all the people and what their skilled labor was, and I kept looking for that for this particular voyage. But it was such a weird thing that Hansen, he was the first one to be, appointed by Lincoln to be the consul to Monrovia, and that was, and Martin had no idea who the white guy was, so it turned out to be a major person. Yeah.
Did any of the people that went over to Monrovia ever come back, or did they just go there and stay? Do you know?
I don't know. This was during the Civil War, and I think these 19 people and probably just got out of town, and because it had been established since 1840s anyway, and it was a place for people to go. The ACS would help them a little bit, and it may be virtuous what they were doing in some cases, or just maybe just to get rid of black people. I don't know.
Chuck, at Bowdoin College graduated a man named John Brown Russwurm. John Brown Russwurm in 1826. He was the third black person to graduate from an American college. He went on to found the Freedmen's Journal, which he was an editor of. He gave up hope of ever living as a black person in the United States, and he returned in the 1840s to Liberia. And he became a governor of the Maryland colony.
Yeah, Maryland had a lot to do with this too. Yeah, I didn't want to. I was trying to be focused, and but yeah, no, I didn't know that. But the Maryland part of it, I know they shipped a lot of people from Maryland.
We have another person here who has a connection to Liberia. Do you want to say something? Yeah, you.
Yeah, this is very fascinating. Still wondering what happened to the, hello? Still wondering what happened from the Emancipation Proclamation after that. Because that is when they would be on their way, way home. That's why whether these are passengers,
Right.
were really passengers, or were they?
Well,
they were cargo.
no, they weren't cargo.
They weren't
They were. Martin uses the term emigrating, so they were definitely emigrating to
Okay.
to Liberia. So they were, I suppose they were free, black, educated people, and that's what Martin couldn't really get his head around. The way they were much more educated than him, probably. I don't know. This is all conjecture, that part. But that's, I would imagine they just stayed there.
Probably.
I didn't have any names. He didn't list any names. That was an afterthought for him. They were just people that annoyed him, basically.
Just as my great aunt was here, and she went over there to Liberia, and her husband was in charge of the finances, and he was white, and he was out of there. They lived in a reverse society, where whites could not own anything, and such an interesting story. And this here is also too. This whole thing kind of been, I'm gonna mix it in because she was there in 1938, 39, and 40. And Firestone was over there, making tires, and without them, we'd have lost World War II because we wouldn't have had enough rubber. But anyway, thanks for that, though, Judy.
Wow, well, thank you so much.
All
This has
right.
been recorded.